Rooted in resilience, inspired by nature, powered by movement. The podcasts where healing meets empowerment. Let's rise and thrive together. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Melissa.
All right. Welcome to Rise and Thrive podcast from Vital Edge Wellness. I'm Melissa and this is Scott. And today we have Nadine with us and I'm so excited to have her here and to share. I'm going to share a little bit about her in a moment, but before that, we're going to get some grounding and I'm going to hand it to Scott to just get us here and present. So we'll take a few moments. So please think of this as not just waiting for this to start, but actually to come into the present moment. So go for it, Scott.
Okay. Well, today I'd like you to just find your most comfortable position. If you're sitting straight back, nice, dignified, doesn't have to be super stiff, but just nice, straight back. Lower your gaze or close your eyes, whatever's comfortable for you, and put your hand on your heart and put your other hand on your stomach. And give yourself this gift to feel yourself breathe. Nice long inhale and exhale. Feeling your chest drop on the exhale. Another inhale, feeling your belly fill. Holding it at the top. Releasing. And find your own pace. Take a moment to step out of the busyness and just be. Feeling yourself breathe, the thing that's on autopilot for you every day. Showing gratitude. Feeling yourself breathe, the thing that's on autopilot for you every day. Showing gratitude. One more nice deep inhale. And on the exhale, letting it all go. Coming back into the present moment, moving your hands back down to your lap. Maybe move your shoulders, move your neck. Come back into our space. I'll hand it over to Melissa.
All right. Well, I always appreciate that because, we're all usually rushing from here to there and to actually take a moment, even if you're about to listen to this because you're on a walk or you're driving a car or something like that, just to ground yourself, to take a moment and be more receptive to what we're about to talk about and open because you're listening to it for a reason. So with that said, I have the honor, and I don't know how many years now we've been friends. So how we met was we were both working on our businesses with the Schmecking a Small Business, and mutual being knew you and knew me and said, you two have to meet, and kept trying to get our paths to cross. And they did, and they've been connected ever since. So every time I would teach a class, I would have a Nadine come and speak. I just have to say because I still have a lot of my clients that I work with that I've been with for decades now. And I just have to say, remember when the gluten-free RN was, and they're right away, they are there and remember. And so I wanted to have her here today to share her story and to help us all walk away with some pretty strong, actionable steps that we can take for our health and our healing to rise and to thrive. So I want to hand it over to Nadine and let her share a little bit about her journey. So welcome.
Oh, it's an honor and a privilege to be here. So thank you very much, Melissa and Scott, for inviting me for this lovely podcast. So I have been a nurse for a very long time, 33 years, and I actually started off in nursing in 1992. So I've been a nurse for like 33 years. I worked in the emergency, trauma, critical care for 16, 17 years all over the state of Oregon. And when I was 40, I thought I would be dead in 6 months. And with my nursing background, that is, somewhat concerning, but I'm also, pretty pragmatic. And I was like, all right, fine, I'll die. I don't care. And I felt that bad. So I got diagnosed. I went to see one of the only dermatologists I hadn't seen because I had this rash that just covered me. And, I had GI, I had neuro, my organs were failing, my lungs were filling up with fluid. And she said, well, I know what you have. She said, you have dermatitis herpetiformis and celiac disease. And that's really interesting because I've been a nurse for a very long time and I have no idea what you just said. And this was back in 2006. And she said, well, it means you can't eat gluten anymore. And I said, okay, what's gluten? And she said, wheat, barley, rye, and oats. And I said, okay, great. That's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And depending on how my shift goes in the emergency department, I might have a beer or two. And she said, well, you can't do that anymore. They did a blood test and a skin biopsy. And I went off to New York City and started what I thought at the time was a gluten-free diet. And I got back and felt kind of shockingly better. But I called up the doctor's office and I said, hey, what do my test results show? And they said, well, your skin biopsy is negative. You have a rash because you scratch your skin. And your blood test is negative. So you don't really have celiac disease. I'm like, okay, great. So I was a little sobby about that, but my kids noticed that I was better on this trip to New York City. And they said, we don't care what your blood test shows. Just stay on the diet and see what happens. And that was in October. And by February, I started my first business, which is RN on Call. So I do managed healthcare, I do end-of-life services, things like that with that business. And then I also started the GlutenFreeRN when I became so horrified by what I learned in that short period of time about it not being a rare disease and worldwide and very prevalent, but not recognized, and certainly not recognized in the United States. So that's my short story. And I wrote a book about it. It's called Donation. And so for the last almost 20 years now, I've been working with, Melissa and other people to heal my intestines and heal my brain because I encourage people to get their brain back because a lot of people are struggling neurologically. And one of the interesting things I've found over the years is that celiac disease, even though the damage starts in your gut, actually is primarily neurologic. So a lot of people will have brain fog or, pick a neuro symptom. And that's from the seizure disorders, any psychiatric disorder, including schizophrenia. They knew about that in 1958 and 1966, by the way. There were studies done. So it's really important to start the process because it takes, it's an ongoing process to heal your guts and your body, especially after, decades of eating things like gluten or dairy or whatever it is that's causing inflammation in your body. Because as we all know, the basis for all disease is essentially, it starts in the gut, but it's inflammation. So healing that inflammation and allowing your intestines to heal so that you absorb nutrients appropriately from the good food that you're eating, and that thereby healing your brain and healing all the other tight junctions, not just in your small intestine, but also in your brain and your lungs and your blood vessels, is extremely important to start like today. And that, as I say, for myself, I'm my own experiment, which everyone is. We all start at different points. We all have slightly
Nadine,
different
I have
DNA.
a question for you.
And then
You mentioned, as everyone knows, I'm not sure everyone does. Could you talk a little bit more about the right foods to reduce inflammation? And because I don't think everybody does know. I know some, and I've heard this before, but maybe go a little more specific about that so our listeners can understand that a little bit.
Okay, so, and that you keep in mind that I've done all of this over time. So I'm on some variation my variation of a paleo type diet at this point. But removing all of the things, and some people call it the autoimmune protocol or anti-inflammatory type diets, where you're removing all of the foods for a period of time that will cause inflammation. So those, of course, is wheat, barley, rye, oats, any of the grains. So even the ones that are supposedly gluten-free, dairy. So gluten and dairy, so gliadin and casein, those are the primary proteins. Those bind with the opioid receptors in your brain, which implies that those proteins are able to cross the, it actually is, there's plenty of research on this, cross the blood-brain barrier, causing inflammation in your brain. So those two are the number one primary causes of inflammation. And then removing anything else that is, people talk about lectins. So those are beans, anything that's a seed or a plant, because those lectins and phytates in those beans or rice or corn or anything like that will cause inflammation. It's what allows the seed to actually pass through your GI tract without getting digested. So those chemicals will make inflammation in your GI tract so that they don't get broken down. So, and that inflammation, of course, starts in your gut, whether you have celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitivity or any of the GRDs or whatever, it doesn't matter. Everyone gets inflammation at the very low end from those grains and seeds. And then if you're a gene carrier of DQ2.5, DQ2.2, or 8, or 7.5, there's a potential that you will develop celiac disease. And those are the only people that will produce antibodies. This is what the second book is about, is the levels of the damage according to your immune system. So that is very rarely addressed. And so we're addressing a new concept. We're putting forth a new concept as far as the intestinal damage in the second book, and explaining why all of this has been allowed to go on for a long time without people actually knowing about it. And I don't mean that as a conspiracy theory. I just mean that in 1953, when they discovered, Dr. Dickey actually wrote his paper and it was published, all of the medical research and whatnot in celiac disease in this country went away, and they stopped reporting on it. So it's not really a conspiracy theory, it's history. If you want to, we can talk about that more if you'd like, but that's part of the issue, is the grains all cause inflammatory responses.
I've heard so many that
whether you have celiac disease or not,
have potentially a medical entity that does testing. They'll say, "Oh, you're not celiac," and then they think they're got the free card to eat whatever. And really, ultimately, celiac or not, we're talking anti-inflammatory for every body on this earth, and that is to eat foods that are whole foods and that the body can digest and absorb and get the nutrients from. So really, to just bring it all together, this is for everyone and not just those that think they may be celiac or not, or even gluten sensitive. It's a path of just supporting and caring for these bodies. As we know,
right?
The food industry is not a health industry. So trying to support us in that way. So I appreciate you sharing. And I wanted to come back to something you mentioned about way back. They said you weren't celiac, but then you continued. And you mentioned the markers. So if you could just clarify to people, what does it mean to be celiac, and then gluten sensitive, and then overall the benefits of us just lessening and removing most of those type of products? That was a lot there, but.
Okay. Yeah. So no, that's okay. This is good. So had I listened to the doctor, the dermatologist that actually tested me, or even eventually I got an endoscopy, they were like, well, you don't have celiac. But I was already on a gluten-free diet when I did get an endoscopy. So my villi were healed or healing at that point. I could say more about that. The endoscopy part of it, there's lots of pitfalls for that. But on my own, I tested myself for the gene associated with celiac disease. And my assumption was that I got genes from each side of my family because I know my family's medical history, right? And so I tested my entire family first, and then I tested myself. Well, my biologic son, and DQ 2.2. My then husband, now my ex-husband, was DQ8, but he was also a type 1 diabetic. That gene crossover is 100%. So if you're a type 1 diabetic, you are a gene carrier for one of the celiac genes. Same thing for MS, and we're finding more and more. My African-American daughter, who's adopted, she's DQ 2.2. And the girl that was living with us at the time was DQ 2.5 homozygous. Now that piqued my interest because I was like, she has red hair and short issues. And she actually was DQ 2.5 homozygous. I'm like, oh, so that is the thing. So it means you get genes from each parent. You're pretty much guaranteed to have celiac disease at some point in your life, which only means producing antibodies. Okay. And there's lots of reasons for not producing antibodies or not being able to produce antibodies. So then I got myself tested, and I'm also DQ 2.5 homozygous, which means I got genes from each parent. Then I went back and I tested my dad before he died, and he was also DQ 2.5 homozygous. I have a niece that's DQ 2.5 homozygous. Now, saying all of that, I give lectures on the genetics of celiac disease also, but we're the only ones that would potentially be able to produce antibodies. Okay. Everyone else gets the damage regardless of their genetic status, but they will not produce antibodies at all. It just isn't part of the makeup because you would need the gliadin protein to bind with those genes. We'll just leave it at that. But the damage, essentially level 1 or level 2, which is the inflammation and the opening of the tight junctions, happens to everyone. And you can have Marsh 3 damage, which is the end stage organ failure, as I like to call it, of your small intestines. All the villi get flattened, even without the genes. So it's a whole spectrum of damage that happens from eating gluten,
very
whether you're
fascinating.
celiac or not.
So what she's talking about with the junctures, I always like to describe it like this: is like when you're eating the breads and the grains and those kind of things, is they're going through and scraping these little hair-like cilia that are pulling in your nutrients. And what that does is start to damage those, and then chunks and widening pieces happen. So this undigested food that's going through you is getting through those into your bloodstream. And your body's like, what the is that? And starts to build an attack towards it because it's a foreign entity.
Right.
So
it's an antigen.
People that have maybe said, oh, I'm going to stay away from gluten, and then they go get tested, like you said, and at some of that, because that heals really well if you take away the problem. And so it can show up and people come away saying, oh, they said I'm not. And so then you go back and start continuing to eat the damaging foods. And then you're starting to look for other avenues. And this is a way that we can support ourselves to eat more and more whole foods, no matter if we are celiac or not. But I love the education out there for people that if they're having other symptoms and things, to say, how would they get testing or being able to find the right connections to do that? How would they get testing or being able to find the right?
So testing is a big topic, but I always recommend that people get the gene testing. It is a cheek swab. There's a lab up in Portland that will do it, Kashi Lab. And if you can put me in as the provider, which is fine. I just have to know that you've ordered the test. It's the cheapest one and the most complete reporting. So you'll get all 4 alleles. So you get 2 alleles from each parent. So they will give you all 4 alleles, not just tell you you're a carrier or not a carrier. And it's $157. So it's a cheek swab. So I try to get, for kids especially, it's really easy to get that test. And it goes right up to Portland. It's one of the best labs in the entire country for gene testing. And then the other testing, I have a recommended lab sheet if you want to put, and it lists out all of the antibodies that should be tested for. Most of the labs will only test for anti-tissue transglutaminase, which 2, which is very limited, and most people will test negative for it. And then even if you test positive, they'll go, it's not high enough. It's not high enough yet, or whatever. I've seen all kinds of things. So it's always good to get tested before you go on a gluten-free diet if it's important to you, but especially for children. There's a lot of caveats with the testing, but I do recommend that people do get tested first. Every doctor, I don't care if they're a dentist or a podiatrist, they can order the test.
Yeah, that's great.
They just
that's really
have
good
to know how to
information. I want to
interpret
get
it.
tested. That'll be interesting.
Does that make sense? Okay.
That's really good information. I think, I'm not a gluten-free diet guy, but having been working with Melissa for the past few years, I'm definitely reduced and I'm more aware, and I've learned a lot. I do like my beer and I do like my tortillas. I'm eating only corn tortillas now.
We're working on it.
Yeah. So I guess the question I have is for someone like myself who I don't eat a lot of carbs, I eat pretty healthy, and is a reduced, I'm going to answer my own question, I guess, is a reduced gluten diet effective, or do you have to go all in? And what are your thoughts around that?
Okay. Number one, I just want to throw out there that there are excellent gluten-free beers right here in Oregon.
I'm going to trust you as the gluten-free nurse that you know what you're talking about, and I'm going to get a list of those beers. Because if there's gluten-free beers that are good, I'm all in.
Well, we should include it in the
And if there's
list.
gluten-free and non-alcoholic beers, I'm even more all in. And if there's gluten-free and non-alcoholic beers, I'm even more. Make a note.
Okay. Beerly Brewing in McMinnville and Groundbreaker up in Portland. Those are two of the best, but there's also Ghost Fish up in Seattle.
That sounds
great. So you
great.
have lots of options, and I'll take you on a tour, and we can go
beer run, yeah,
for the gluten-free beer breweries in Oregon. Let me just say that even a breadcrumb or a dusting of flour will cause the same damage, and it's on a cellular level. Okay, it's not just like it comes through like a bulldozer. Not every time, but that's why like someone like myself has to be 100% on a strict lifelong gluten-free diet, and that's what I recommend for everyone. There's enough ways for gluten to get into your body that are like, even sometimes I will get hit with a gluten stick is what I call it. So you have to be careful of lotions, because everything that you put on your skin, your shampoo and everything else will contain gluten unless it's a specific products. So not just toothpaste and things, but shampoo and whatnot. I get a lot of people with scalp issues, because a lot of people have scalp issues. And then you have to say, what kind of shampoo are you using? What kind of hairspray? All those products, even dyes, hair dyes contain gluten. Who knew? So it takes 28 seconds for those, especially on open skin. If you have any, lesions or anything, scratches or whatever, less time for those proteins to get into your bloodstream. So it's very important. Like, even, I only go to dedicated restaurants anymore that are dedicated gluten-free. They can't be, even having flour tortillas or anything. We're extremely lucky in Oregon, but there's other cities and other places around that are pretty good about dedicated gluten-free restaurants or eateries or bakeries or whatever. We have like 50 gluten-free bakeries and restaurants up in Portland that are outstanding.
Yeah, I'm just seeing this bus.
I take people in those tours also.
The gluten-free beer and bread tour.
So, and I also want to reiterate, just like you referred to the 1950s and stuff, like, this is not new. And so that's what a lot of people think, oh, why is this, and we used to be able to, and back in the day, and I'm like, Nadine would say no. And then also, so there's that piece. And then also, as we know in other countries, people that can be gluten sensitive can go over and not had the reaction that they have over here. So even with the damage, that can still be happening. So thoughts on those two things? History.
So, okay, history. There were two doctors, and it was a father-son team. Dr. Haas and Dr. Haas wrote an excellent textbook. It's the only one we've had on celiac disease. It's called The Management of Celiac Disease. It came out in 1950, 51. And basically, they came up with the specific carbohydrate diet. People know about that a little bit. But it's what they used to treat the kids in the 90s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. They were known as banana babies, the specific carbohydrate diet. So they took all of the grains out, they took all those things, and they mostly fed them bananas, milk, fat, high fat. And they would give them, and this is going to sound, interesting, but they give them IV infusions of vitamins because these kids were starving, right? And they would diagnose these kids with a fecal fat score because they couldn't absorb their fat. So they would be starving and not being able to absorb their fat. So they would test the stool, and if it had a lot of fat in it, which we don't do anymore unless unless I'm in charge, because then you can't absorb your fat soluble vitamins, which are A, D, E, and K. And if you're not absorbing those, it's really hard to absorb anything else. Okay. So that textbook came out in 1950. In 1953, Dr. Dickey's report came out. It was all based on children in World War II who the parents, actually it was the moms that noticed the kids that had previously been sick and starving, typical looking children with celiac disease, they got better on a starvation diet of eating things like tulip bulbs. So they actually got better. And then once they airdropped bread and grain products back in, those kids got sick again. And the moms were the ones that took that information to Dr. Dickey. And then he spent a decade or 12 years or whatever doing the research and said, no, it's the gluten. It's the wheat, barley, rye that are causing these kids to be sick. T53. And trust me, there's been cases of celiac disease way back in ancient history, and we're finding those bones now, and we can test them. And there's lots of research on that also. It's kind of good. But the history is the number 2 chapter in our book that we're working on at this point, because that's fascinating.
I know. I asked.
What was the other question?
Well, I want to touch base
history
on history a little bit more, because when I hear it, when I'm talking to you, I can hear phrases from people, because when it comes to something that we're often addicted to, we don't want to give it up. And I've heard people with the argument, well, it's in the Bible and the bread and all that kind of stuff. And so, and again, I'm not trying to I just want to help people understand that this is not something new, to understand that the body, what it's meant to ingest and digest well, and what's happened to our food sources as we are now in the current day and age, and how it's gotten challenging. So I know.
Lots to say about that. Yeah. Wheat's been changed. It's been hybridized to have 50 to 400% more gluten in it today. And we do that in Oregon than previously. The wheat in Europe is, and I tell this to people all the time, and the people with celiac and non-celiac gluten sensitivity cannot eat their wheat in Europe either, or any other country. It still causes damage. It's not as inflammatory, and it's not as gluten-filled as what we have here, but it still, on a very cellular level, will cause that damage and keep you sick. I've had plenty of people go to Europe and find out that they were celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitivity while they were there, because the doctors are a little bit more aware of it and know what to test for. And they got lucky, right? So, they cannot go to
I appreciate
Europe
you sharing
or
that.
anywhere else and eat the wheat.
A lot of people think they have to have these outward symptoms and be like, oh, I'm fine. And it's that internal that we don't see. And I want to bring this home here, is that it often manifests in all these other ways. And we try to dismiss it, or use a cream, or use something else to get that symptom to go away that is directly correlated to something we're not looking at. So that's often why these symptoms, or can't see. Yeah. Just like you said, scalp issues or skin issues, we often are putting that off as something else.
Canker sores, itchy skin, dry eyes, NASH, which is non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or any kidney disease, if it's an IgA deposit in your kidneys. I mean, we are trying to like narrow it down or try to make the list shorter, but really there's over 300 signs and symptoms associated, even more now. And this was in 2007 with people presenting symptoms people come in with. And they're like, oh, we didn't expect celiac disease, or we didn't expect a gluten-related disorder, but they got better on a gluten-free diet, and their intestines healed up and their nervous system healed up. Takes longer to heal your nervous system than
mental
it
health
does
piece
your
is
GI
huge.
tract.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that actually. And final question before we close out today, but having family members in both of our families suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's, where does gluten affect that process?
You get started.
Yeah, I know.
How many minutes do I have? Okay, so let me just say that our brains are not supposed to shrink. There's a number of deficiencies that will cause. So fat, if you're not absorbing fat, your entire nervous system is made of fat. Okay, myelin, it's the insulation that covers all of your nerves. So any demyelination of your nervous system is potentially related to your diet and your absorption or malabsorption. And then we know like all the copper and the B's, vitamins are crucial for your nervous system. A, D, E, and K are crucial for your brain and your continued nervous system. So there's been links, it's the gut-brain connection, right? So if your guts aren't healthy or they're inflamed or you have malabsorption for whatever reason, then your brain is going to be impacted. Keeping in mind, and I know I said this earlier, but if you have those tight junctions in your intestine are opened up, as you explained, Melissa, it's not just in your gut, it's in your brain, your blood-brain barrier, which then is not working, right? It allows those proteins or bacteria or parasites or whatever to get into your brain. That's always a bad
Parasite and
idea.
brain should never go together in the same sentence.
I know. It does happen though, by the way. And then gluten ataxia, which is when people are walking like they're drunk, proprioception is off and their ability to balance is off. That's all in the cerebellar part of your brain. And gluten ataxia, Dr. Marios Hadjivassiliou, who's in the UK, he's an expert on this. It's whether you have, it doesn't matter celiac or not, that gluten will cause people to have gluten ataxia and balance issues. And yes, dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS. I get a lot of people that were diagnosed with those things and then come to find out it's not really ALS or Parkinson's or whatever. It's really a diet change and they get better. So that's what I like. That's, as a nurse, that's ideal is, it's a diet change. You don't have to be on lifelong medications. You don't have to have surgery. You don't have to be in the memory care unit, provided we find the damage before it's complete. At some point there's damage done and we can't undo it. But, ideally we're going to find these people. And kids, I'm just going to throw this out there. We know that gluten has a huge impact on fetal development and maternal health. Okay, those are two big topics, right? The extra shiny, sparkly children I see are fed in utero, like with a paleo type diet or some type of whole food type diet, where you take out those gluten and the grains. Number one, the mom is absorbing her nutrients so she can then feed the baby, right? Same thing with breastfeeding. Those kids are extra shiny and sparkly and not as irritable and cranky and they grow. So gluten will cause stunted growth. It'll cause rickets. It'll cause all kinds of things. So if we want healthy children, we have to, and we want them to have really good mental health and be able to learn, then we have to watch what they're eating.
A lot of the studies I've read about Alzheimer's prevention, they say if you're starting in your 40s, it's too late, meaning continue to do it, but really we should be aware of these things in our 20s and 30s to begin the best effect, if not from being a child and being born. So it's really, I think we're making progress in that knowledge, but it's not getting out there in a way that is making the biggest impact. And as my final thought, I'll say that habits are hard to break. people don't want to give up on the things they love, like bread. Bread is a big deal to a lot of people. And I joke, I make really good bread, but it's a meditative process for me to make bread. I don't even eat my own bread, not because I don't like it. I just not really a big bread eater, but people want to stay in what they find comfort in, and they're not seeing the results on their skin or otherwise it's internal. And so I can see this leading to the denial in what you're saying today. And I so appreciate
No, I
appreciate
get that.
you, sharing so much with our audience to be aware.
If I can just throw, if you're making bread, you're breathing it in, and then you're swallowing it. It's ending up in your gut no matter what. So that's environmental
Yeah.
exposure.
Well, Melissa wants me to try some gluten-free bread this year.
Well, no, I told them gluten-free sourdough is what I'm after.
Yeah.
If he's going to make bread, to do the gluten-free sourdough.
I'm going to give it a shot.
Yeah. And I mean, really, the microbiome and all this stuff comes into play, but that's why I mean it's a process. This has been fabulous. I hope I answered all your questions.
We have so many more and only a limited amount of time, but that doesn't mean we won't have you back.
Well, right.
So,
We'll continue because I want to inspire people to just bring this into their awareness that the symptoms they are having, not to just think, oh, it's this or that, but to let this be part on their radar. Because just like you shared, I still remember a dear client showed up years ago that had the canker sores and different symptoms. And when I exposed to this person was ready to make some actionable steps, and it was a night and day difference to watch their life change. And so it's inspiring just to send it out there to everyone that it's doable. You're not going to feel deprived. You're not going to feel like you're on a diet. It is a micro steps at a time and transition that you can make and explore. And if you want help with that, you can reach out to us. We'll help you with that. And Nadine's amazing, and we'll support you on this journey. And so thank you. I appreciate you very much. And I always turn to her for my resource because she's a depth of knowledge and got all the data. And I do want to have you finish out with sharing your book again. And then the second one, do you have a title yet?
No title yet. We have working titles, but nothing definitive yet. But, I did the podcast, the GlutenFreeRN podcast. It's a couple of years old now, but still noteworthy information, and all I would stand by it. And the donation is my first book. And this is the 10th year of it being published, or 10 years since it's been published. And people are still reading it and reading it again because it's a quick, easy read. I do consultations, as we usually work really well together, and making sure that people are helping people with the process, because it is more of a process than just a one-stop.
Well, and it's not an automatic process in our medical community right now. So it's
no.
So we're hoping
that's another whole podcast.
We're hoping to bring that back.
Yeah, Nadine, how do people get a hold of you?
I'm pretty easy to get a hold of, the GlutenFreeRN. If you look, Google me, there's little videos, there's all of the podcasts, and you can look up my website. It's, glutenfreern.com. So you can find me on Instagram. I try not to post too much on social media anymore, just because, but people find me all over the world just from podcast and word of mouth and all kinds of things. And I will say I'm probably one of the only practitioners outside of the UK, and that I do trust them almost explicitly, that doesn't take pharmaceutical money or any industry money, because it taints the information you will get. I will say that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, we're going to do our part to get this out to our audience and put your information in our show notes. So thank you for spending time with us today, and thank you to everyone listening today. And we'll see you next time on Rise and Thrive, and take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Namaste.
Bye, Melissa. Bye, Scott.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Rise and Thrive, a podcast by Vital Edge Wellness Coaching. If you found this episode meaningful, please rate, review, and share it with someone who might need it. For upcoming retreats and to join the Vital Edge Wellness community, head to vitaledgewellnesscoaching.com. Let's rise and thrive together.